Hello, and welcome to our Be Human Rights Confident video series. My name is Anna Trippinell. I'm a business and human rights advisor and founder of Human Level. In this video, we will delve into what the climate crisis is and what it means for people, according to the latest UN scientific research. This video provides the foundational information about why companies are tackling climate change and considering people in the process. We'll speak in another video about the how, the actions companies can take to tackle climate change in a rights-respecting way. Why will we be focusing here on the IPCC's findings? The IPCC is the UN's Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. It is the body of leading climate experts and scientists from around the world. The IPCC's first report was all the way back in 1990, and its warning then of the rising greenhouse gas emissions led to the 1992 UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, approved by governments, which is the parent treaty to the 2015 Paris Agreement. The IPCC produces reports around every 7 years, and we are right now in the midst of IPCC's 6th assessment report. The IPCC has released its first part last year, which delves into the core underlying science of climate change. Its second part, which delves into the impacts of the climate crisis, has just been released, and its third report on ways of reducing those impacts will be coming next. So, let's go through some of the essentials from these reports before delving into the impacts on people part. The IPCC finds that the scale of recent changes across the climate system are unprecedented. The scientists find that the attribution of extreme climate change to human influence is stronger than what we previously thought. Every region will be impacted differently, but no region will be spared. We are currently at an average warming of 1.1 degrees Celsius as compared to when the Industrial Revolution of 1850 began, what we call a pre-industrial state. And the IPCC finds that it's likely that we will reach 1.5 degrees of warming by the early 2030s. The IPCC underscores that every fraction of a degree of warming makes a difference. To illustrate this, let's delve into land and ocean carbon sinks. Around a quarter of CO2 emissions that we generate each year is absorbed by the oceans. Another 30% of CO2 emissions are absorbed by land, forests, grasslands, wetlands. So that's around 55% of the carbon dioxide emitted by humans, which is absorbed by the oceans and land. But the more carbon we emit, the less effective these land and ocean carbon sinks become. And at one point, these sinks will start to emit CO2 rather than absorb it, leading to runaway warming. The IPCC makes clear that the impacts of climate change are affecting billions of people around the world in many different ways, and that these impacts will accelerate over time. So, what are the kinds of impacts on people we are talking about? Let's run through a few. Heat stress. There will be an increase in heat stress, resulting in deaths and other impacts. Deaths will increase from 30% of people exposed to deadly heat stress today to up to 75% of people exposed to it by the end of the century. Heat stress also impacts the ability to work, the ability to produce food, which in turn impacts livelihoods and leads to higher food prices. It's making hot areas even hotter and drastically reducing the time people can spend outside. Loss of homes. A growing number of people will lose their homes. More than 1 billion people who are living in low-lying coastal cities and areas around the world are at risk of losing their homes by mid-century. Many of these people will need to move to higher ground, which in turn will increase conflict and forced relocation. Lack of water. Climate change and extreme events, floods and droughts, will impact water quality and availability. This in turn will impact hygiene, food production and ecosystems. Around half of the world's population currently experiences severe water shortages at some point during the year, in part due to climate change. Water scarcity will increase, with 800 million to 3 billion people who could experience chronic water scarcity at 2 degrees of warming, or there could be up to 4 billion experiencing it at 4 degrees of warming. Food shortages and hunger. The warmer it gets, the more difficult it will become to grow and produce, transport, distribute, buy and store food. Hunger will increase, with 8 million to 80 million people suffering from hunger by mid-century. The actual number depends on future policies and actions taken. Under a high warming scenario, up to 183 million additional people could become undernourished due to climate change by 2050. Malnutrition will impair the growth and development of children. 1.4 million more children in Africa will have impaired growth, known as severe stunting, by 2050 under 2.1 degrees of warming. Reduced air quality. Increases in wildfires will impact the air quality, which in turn will impact human health. We are seeing that wildfire seasons are becoming longer and impacting more areas. Increased diseases. Changes in temperature, in particular, are increasing the frequency and the spread of diseases in people. The kinds of diseases that will increase due to this rise in temperature include dengue, malaria, cholera, and Rift Valley fever. Let me conclude with 4 cross-cutting themes here. First, we are talking about impacts on the human rights of people today, but even more so people of tomorrow. Climate change will affect the lives of today's children tomorrow, and those of their children much more than our own lives. The IPCC finds that even if we manage to stay under 1.5 degrees of global warming by 2100, children aged 10 or younger today will live through 4 times more extreme events than those we are already seeing today, and this number will rise the more warming there is. These kinds of risks won't be experienced by a person aged 55 today in their remaining lifetime under any warming scenario. The IPCC reminds us that today, 2100 might seem far away, but children who were born in 2020 will be 80 by 2100. The end of the century is less than a lifetime away. Second, everyone will be impacted, but the impacts will be much worse for some. The most vulnerable people will be hardest hit by climate change. Poverty and inequality significantly increase the risks. We will see more risks for women, for young people, for the elderly, for ethnic and religious minorities, for indigenous people, for refugees. And some regions will be more severely impacted than others. For instance, hunger increases will be worse in sub-Saharan Africa, South Asia, and Central America. Third, human rights are strongly interconnected with nature. Humans are just one of the many living organisms in our beautiful and complex world. At a global warming level of 2 degrees by 2100, up to 18% of all species on land will be at high risk of going extinct. If the world warms up to 4 degrees, every second plant or animal species that we know of will be threatened. The IPCC makes clear that the needs of climate, nature, and communities have to be considered together. A healthy planet is fundamental to secure a livable future for people on Earth. We depend on nature, living organisms, and ecosystems in more ways than we imagine. And finally, there are interconnections between climate impacts as well as between climate and other environmental impacts. We know that climate hazards act together to make things worse. They reinforce each other and amplify the impacts. For example, farmers faced with reduced crop yields because of heat and drought, are further impacted by reduced productivity because of heat stress. This in turn increases food prices, reduces household incomes, and leads to health risks from malnutrition. We also know that climate change impacts are adding to and compounded by other environmental impacts we are facing. Many of our world's ecosystems are already facing a biodiversity crisis due to human impacts such as deforestation, pollution, overfishing, and change in land use. In short, rising temperatures are making other environmental challenges worse, and vice versa. In conclusion, the IPCC finds that if we take aggressive action today, we can limit temperature rise to 1.6 degrees by 2050 and reduce to 1.4 degrees by 2100. However, if we take a high carbon pathway, temperatures could rise to 2.4 degrees by 2050 and 4.4 degrees by 2100. The IPCC warns of a series of tipping points beyond which recovery from climate breakdown may become impossible. Let me leave you with this quote from the IPCC. The scientific evidence is unequivocal. Climate change is a threat to human well-being and the health of the planet. Any further delay in concerted global action will miss a brief and rapidly closing window to secure a livable future. We'll speak in another video about the actions companies can take to tackle climate change in a rights-respecting way. Thank you for watching, and see you soon.